mother is putting poison in my food and she's been doing it for 30 years. Okay, it's plausible but unlikely, but it's a non-bizarre delusion. So those are examples of hallucinations and delusions. These aren't these minor things that people overlook. Sometimes they can be kind of subtle, but ultimately if you come in contact with professionals like Mr. Bargo did, somebody's going to recognize those symptoms. The third component that really captures a psychosis is disorganized thinking. When you have disorganized thinking, the person is talking to you, but he's making absolutely no sense. They have one term for it. It's called word salad, that represents the most extreme of the disorganized thinking, where they're just saying these random words and it makes absolutely no sense. That's how you recognize psychosis in people. Those are the three symptoms that need to be present for you to recognize that somebody is actually experiencing psychosis. So in a case like this, that it's incumbent on the professional. Let's determine if this person has this psychosis. Did this psychosis, does it explain the behavior we've seen in the instant crime? Does it explain the behavior we've seen historically? Versus somebody who does not have psychosis but just demonstrates bad behavior. Okay, that's essentially that's the crux of the issue. The bad behavior is, most people in prison, they're criminally minded individuals. They don't have the moral breaks that the rest of us have. They tend to try to take things, and that's what they get in trouble about, and that's what gets them in prison. They make decisions to break the rules and break the laws. And their behavioral decisions are not based in mental illness. They're behavioral decisions. Okay? So when we look at that from an individual standpoint, like in Mr. Bargo's case, we're trying to retrace the history. Let's determine which it is. Is it psychosis? They have no control over psychosis. It's neurochemical. That's why we give them medications. It's a neurochemical issue, and we give them medications, and that adjusts the neurochemistry, and their psychosis goes away. Behaviorally, it's not neurochemical. It's behavioral. It's choices the individual makes to behave in a certain way in spite of the intervention and the concern of people around them. In Mr. Bargo's case, what we see, or what I saw when I reviewed the records, and again, this is some of the records. I have a lot more that I didn't even bring in the courtroom. Point being, he's 21 years old. I have tons of records, great records on him. And again, sometimes they're real sparse and it's hard to make the determination. But in Mr. Bargo's case, we have him getting in contact with professionals, with different teachers, with different principals, with tons of people throughout the process that are looking at him because he has issues and because he has behavioral problems, and drawing some inferences about what's wrong with him. So we have great data. One of the things I would point to is, a lot of these behavioral issues, they tend to get worse during adolescence. Dr. Berlin mentioned that his first diagnosis, he was first diagnosed with bipolar disorder, rapid cycling. Okay, that's not true. The bipolar disorder diagnosis of rapid cycling didn't occur until March of 2009, just a couple years ago. That's the only time that diagnosis was given to him up until that point. He was diagnosed when he was 7 or 8 with ADD, attention deficit disorder, and ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Those are behavioral issues. Okay, it's not psychosis. Well, most of us have experience with a child who has had one of those. From 3rd or 4th grade, Mr. Bargo is getting in trouble in terms of not complying with things he's supposed to do in the school environment, not doing his work, talking back to teachers, fighting with other kids. Ultimately, according to Mr. Bargo, he would have been suspended about 25 times from school, which is a high number. That occurred beginning when he was in grade school and continued up until 9th or 10th grade when he stopped and got his GED. He got expelled from one school. I think the expulsion was, and I may be wrong about this, it was either a suspension or expulsion, but for writing on the sidewalk at the school, the Lutheran school, that Tracy is a whore. That's his mother. Okay, so just those incidents of behavior. Tracy is a whore. Is that psychotic? Well, no, it's not psychotic. It's behavioral. It's when he leaves messages to his mother saying you're a slut. That's not psychotic. He's not hallucinating or experiencing delusions or demonstrating disorganized thinking. He's got these characterological personality issues that are coming out. He's referred ultimately for the outpatient counseling that starts in 2007. This outpatient counseling was because he was behaving badly in school and having some real difficulties. One of the things that was noted when he started counseling, this was in 2006, so at that time he's 14 years old. He starts counseling with a Dr. Farmer through an organization up in Michigan. What Dr. Farmer says, so this is an example. He's seeing a professional. He's seeing a professional bi-weekly going in for counseling. So what we would expect from viewing the history is this professional who's dealing with him closely, it's his individual therapist, his professional is going to have a pretty good idea of whether Mr. Bargo is a psychotic kid or if he has behavioral problems. Okay, those are the two things we're trying to sort out. In his bi-weekly contacts with Dr. Farmer, first of all, Dr. Farmer says no history of hallucinations, no history of delusions, no history of the psychotic stuff we're talking about, no evidence of that. He doesn't report it. Then during the individual therapy Dr. Farmer's having with Mr. Bargo, he's describing him as things like he's demonstrating oppositionality. He's oppositional defiant. He doesn't accept responsibility or accountability for anything. He's blaming everybody else. He's getting suspended from school for lying. He's lying about his mother grounding him. Negativistic, hostile, defiant. Suspensions from school for acting out behavior. So the point being, he starts his therapy on an outpatient basis in about May of 2006. It goes through May of 2007, and he's always described in these terms: oppositional, defiant, acting out, not listening, problems with authority, blaming everybody else, not taking responsibility, not accountable for his behavior. Okay, never, this is an important point, not only is it important what is said in the records, it's important what is not said in the records. Okay, this professional who had individual therapy with him for a year never said the kid's psychotic, he's hallucinating, he's delusional, he's demonstrating disorganized thinking. So for me, that's a huge data point, a data point that we often do not get. By the time the therapy ended, about a week later, the therapist, Dr. Farmer, is recommending inpatient treatment of Mr. Bargo because of, I can't remember the term he used. Let's see if I can find it just a second. Here it is. The term is inordinate rage and anger. Okay, I recommend inpatient treatment because of his inordinate rage and anger, especially towards his mother. So again, it's being characterized as this kid's expressing this anger and rage and stuff, but nothing psychotic. He's not expressing psychotic symptoms. So we go on from there. He's like 15 now. We see a clinic of child study document that came from the circuit court family division related to Mr. Bargo because he had some criminal trouble. He pled to a charge of being incorrigible in the state of Michigan. Basically, incorrigible means you can't. You've been unable to change a behavior. It's been bad, and you've been unable to do it, and he's not responding to parental authority. So when they do the evaluation in 2007, June, again, they're describing some very relevant things. They talk about his diagnosis of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, nothing about any kind of schizoaffective disorder that Dr. Berlin talked about, nothing about any kind of schizophrenia. We're not talking about psychotic mental illness. Angry much of the time. Psychological testing was done with him. Essentially, it says a lot of the same things that the other records are saying. He tends to externalize blame onto others for his problems rather than seeing responsibility and control lying within him. So ultimately, based on that evaluation, he's given a diagnosis. Okay, he's already been diagnosed with ADD and ADHD. Now he's given a diagnosis of oppositional defiant disorder. Okay, that's a behavioral disorder. That is not a psychotic mental illness. So we have, really compelling data from 2006, 2007 up until now that says, Mr. Bargo has severe behavioral problems, things that you see in a troubled kid who cannot behave in home, he cannot behave at school, he's got some criminal issues, people are trying to help him in individual therapy, it doesn't succeed, and now this evaluation by essentially the court says he's oppositional defiant.
Dr. Pritchard, what is oppositional defiant disorder?
Well, it's one of the behavioral disorders that we see in childhood, we see in kids. There's just a few of them. One of them is oppositional defiant. This is the book that was referred to this morning as the Psychologist and Psychiatrist Bible. I don't want to be irreverent. It's not that important, but it's pretty important when we're a psychologist or a psychiatrist. If you're not following the guidelines of this, you're on shaky grounds. Okay, this is what we communicate. It's not just for insurance companies to communicate, to understand what's being diagnosed. It's so professionals can communicate with the same nomenclature about illnesses, mental illnesses, so that we can prescribe adequate treatment for the person, essentially. If you're not following this, then you're coming from someplace else. I don't understand, say, for example, what Dr. Berlin's saying if he's not following this book, because in this book it tells us, and that's how we communicate with other professionals about it. One of the diagnoses in this book is oppositional defiant disorder. It has a number of criteria or symptoms or behavioral manifestations that you look at to determine if a child has oppositional defiant disorder. Remember, during this study in June of 2007, that's what they ultimately diagnosed him with. What it says is, may I read from it?
Yes.
A pattern of angry, irritable mood, argumentative, defiant behavior, or vindictiveness lasting at least 6 months, as evidenced by at least 4 symptoms from any of the following categories. Often loses temper, is often touchy and easily annoyed, is often angry and resentful, often argues with authority figures or, for children and adolescents, with adults, often actively defies or refuses to comply with requests from authority figures or with rules, often deliberately annoys others, often blames others for his or her mistakes and behaviors, has been spiteful or vindictive at least twice within the past 6 months. He's got to have 4 of them. He's got at least 6 of those. So he meets criteria for that diagnosis. When there's kind of talk about, well, he's schizoaffective because he's angry and mad or whatever, sure, if you're schizoaffective, you can be angry and mad, but if you're oppositional defiant, you can be angry and mad too. If you're antisocial, you can be angry and mad. That's another characterological thing. A lot of people think that antisocial means you don't want to be around people. It's not what antisocial means in the clinical realm. About 75% of individuals in prison have antisocial personality disorder. It's a criminal personality. They violate the rights of others and societal norms. That's what antisocial refers to. Antisocial means they're not very pro-social. They take advantage of other people. He has a lot of antisocial traits. Mr. Bargo, which is what you're seeing from his history, all this description of problems with authority, defiance, not following rules, lighting fires, breaking things, hurting others, sometimes hurting himself. Hurting himself is, that's not a psychotic thing. Typically, it's not the psychotic folks that hurt themselves, it's the folks with the personality issues that hurt themselves. And that's, I think, all the things that we see with Mr. Bargo can be explained by, his personality issues, oppositional defiant disorder, antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, all these characterological rather than psychotic or neurochemically driven phenomena.
In your review of the records, Dr. Pritchard, did you see that he was, in fact, prescribed Seroquel at the Marion County Jail?
Yes, I did.
And is there some use for Seroquel other than as an antipsychotic?
Yeah, I mean, it's so misleading. Yes, it's an antipsychotic. There's these class of medications. One's antipsychotic, there's a bunch of them under there. One's anti-anxiety, there's a bunch of them under there. Antidepressant, there's a bunch of them under there. It doesn't mean that when somebody is prescribed a medication, say, for example, an antipsychotic medication, it means they're necessarily
Technology is pretty amazing because it saves things. Like,
not necessarily because he has an anxiety disorder. It has other uses. Dr. Berlin mentioned that sometimes a medication called Depakote can be used for anticonvulsive medication and a mood agent. So there's other uses just other than the just one for a lot of the medications, and that goes for Seroquel. Sleep and not psychosis these days.
And the jail records do indicate that he was given the Seroquel in the PM.
Correct.
And that there were complaints that he had of sleeplessness as well.
Yeah, it sounds like it was prescribed for that purpose, not for psychosis, and it was prescribed at night rather than in the morning, meaning that he's going to take it at bedtime, which is typically when they give the ones that they want the individual to have to help them sleep.
Now, there's been some testimony and discussion of partial complex seizures. Are you familiar with that, Dr. Pritchard?
Yes.
And what does your review of the records and interview of Mr. Bargo in this case tell you, I guess maybe the absence of information or the presence of information, tell how partial complex seizures may or may not relate in this case?
Well, the partial complex seizures, it's not mentioned in his records. And again, we have great records. I still have, there's still records from the Marion County Jail. There's records from admission to Vassar where he was there for a year, and they didn't mention anything about him being psychotic. They mentioned him having continued behavioral problems, described as verbally inappropriate, resistant, disrespectful, disruptive, negativistic, aggressive, horseplays, fights, poor attitude, immature, arguing. Okay, so these descriptors are used for him throughout his treatment in Vassar and in the Marion County Jail, where he's still having trouble. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Could you redirect me a little bit?
The partial complex seizure.
Partial complex seizures. And what we don't see in all those records is reference to partial complex seizures. Again, it's one of those things that just pops up, in the context of what we're doing now, but it's never seen this history before. So that's peculiar to me as a forensic psychologist, but also, partial complex seizures with all his contact with professionals and nobody diagnoses it before. And typically, I've seen where people try to explain these behaviors that last for hours and days in partial complex seizures. I'm not an expert in partial complex seizures. I've experienced them in other cases with individuals. They legitimately occur, and what tends to happen is a person will engage in a behavior.
Jack, he said he's not an expert in that field, but he's getting ready to render an opinion on it.
Sustained.
have you seen individuals that had partial complex seizures and their behavior?
Many times.
Your Honor, may the witness describe the behavior that he observed?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you describe that behavior?
Okay, typically, in my experience, what has happened is a person will demonstrate a relatively complex activity, and I say relatively complex because, yes, typically when somebody has a seizure, you know, they fall over on the ground, right, and they're shaking and they don't have any control. So the strange thing about the partial complex is they don't fall over on the ground. They actually do things. You can't really tell they're having a seizure. One of the guys that I have had experience with, he would suddenly start running across the yard and act as if he's after something, but there wouldn't be anything there, and it would last very briefly. It would last for less than a minute, less than 30 seconds most cases. So that's the complex behavior. Strange because he's not falling down like most individuals with seizures have. So it's relatively complex, but it's not like he's driving to California. It's not that complex. So it has to be pulled in a little bit from what seems to be on the table. It's not like days and days of complex behavior. It's moments of relatively complex behavior relative to the person having a seizure and falling over on the ground.
Now, Dr. Pritchard, in addition to meeting with the defendant and reviewing the records that have been placed in evidence about his previous history, did you also review records relative to the crime itself for which we're here today?
Yes.
Okay. Now, your observation about the behavioral disorder, specifically the oppositional defiant disorder and other things that you have observed, how does that relate to the crime itself?
Well, again, it's incumbent on the professional when you're doing these evaluations. Does it appear that his history and the crime specifically is generated from a psychotic process or not? Okay, so I'm saying in my review of everything up until the point of this crime in April of 2011, that there's not indication that he has a psychotic process. And then I'm going to look at the crime to determine whether it seems like a psychotic process was generating that behavior, or does it seem like more of the same with Mr. Bargo with the gun, who shoots the victim. They ultimately get him in the bathtub. Interesting thing, very interesting for me in my analysis, is mutilation of the body. There's evidence about Mr. Bargo trying to do something to the kneecaps, break the kneecaps to facilitate hog tying the victim. Typically, when you're mutilating a body, that tells you about the character of the individual. Okay, so most of us have a hard time thinking about killing another person. Most of us, from a normal perspective, normal personality, we consider that we can kill in certain situations. If somebody's trying to harm my family, my daughter, try to harm me, if there's something heinous being done, it's the only way to stop it, we could kill. But it's not something that any of us contemplate seriously doing if we don't have to. Beyond that, this is a premeditated murder. But beyond that, the body is mutilated. So imagine not only you have the capacity to shoot a person in the face from several feet away, but also break their kneecaps to facilitate hog tying and take them to the fire that has already been started for the sole purpose of getting rid of evidence. On top of that, take the teeth out. Okay, so this is the character we're talking about. Most of us say, wow, that's just horrible. Yes, it is horrible, and individuals who are psychopathic on that end of the character, they're the ones that engage in mutilation of the body because they don't feel the same way we do. They don't have empathy the same way we do. They don't contemplate that they're destroying lives the same way we do. So, all the planning, the instructing other people, when it's done, hiding the gun. Okay,
I've been coloring Liz's hair for years.
Shoveling the remains of a partial complex seizure, It has nothing to do with a psychotic process where he's hallucinating and misperceiving what's going on. He's carrying out exactly what he wanted to carry out because he identified something that he didn't like and he wanted to get rid of it, and he wanted to not get caught.
Now, Dr. Pritchard, did you administer or did you complete an assessment instrument regarding psychopathy in this case?
I did.
And could you explain to the jury what you did and what that is?
Yes. In the forensic realm, in most forensic cases that I do, and I do multiple a week, I'm going to administer what's called a psychopathy checklist. A psychopathy checklist is a simple checklist that you're looking at a cluster of personality and behavioral characteristics. If present in the individual you're assessing, it's extremely relevant to yours. And all for the purpose, again, of determining, is this guy a psychopath or not? Most times they're not. Probably 1 or 2 in 100 are, but you need to know whether they are or not.
And what conclusion were you able to reach based on your assessment?
Well, I'll give you kind of the baseline. Most people in this courtroom, it's 20 items. You can score a 0, 1, or a 2 on each item, so the maximum score is a 40. Most people in the general population, these characteristics, behavioral and personality characteristics, are essentially negative ones. They define the antisocial or criminally minded individual. When a lot of the behavioral and personality characteristics are present in the individual, it's kind of turbocharging the criminal guy. He's the really bad criminal. So most of us in this courtroom, out of a possible 40, are going to, the general population scores between a 9 and 11 usually. Okay? Most incarcerated males in prison who are very antisocial in their orientation, criminally minded, they score about a 24. The classic, the prototypical psychopath scores a 30 or above. Okay, so there's a 2-point standard error. Anytime you're measuring something, there's human error. There's about a 2-point standard error, so we're talking anywhere between 28 and 32 is classically psychopathic, then above 32 is very psychopathic. For Mr. Bargo, I scored him a 28. So most of us, 9 to 11, most incarcerated males about a 24, he's 28, which is right up there on the cusp with being classically psychopathic. So what I would say is his history reflects this is a psychopathic kid in terms of not following rules, all the behavioral issues, all the opposition to authority, all the kind of criminally minded stuff, the suspensions from school, the 1 expulsion, the disrespect to mom, to sister, to grandma, etc., plus the crime, the mutilation of the body, plus involving the 4 that he instructed who are now in prison. He's very psychopathic in his personality and orientation. It has nothing to do with psychosis. It has nothing to do with hallucinations. It has nothing to do with delusions. It's a personality makeup that's very dangerous.
I don't have any further questions.
Cross-examination.
So you basically gave him a test to determine whether or not he was a psychopath, right?
Yes, sir. It's not really a test. It's kind of a checklist. It's a personality and behavioral checklist, whether these traits are or are not present in the person, basically for their entire lives.
Indeed, it is not a test. It is a checklist, right?
Correct.
Okay. What other tests did you give him?
I didn't give him any other tests.
Now, notice you were very quick to say MMPI's got problems and point to your quantifications of it. What about your MMPI of him?
No reason to administer an MMPI when I had one that Dr. Berlin had done recently.
Well, why not? Why not? Because I'm asking you this. The standards that you harped on and that you kept on stressing, 7 times talking about standards and protocol, you said were violated in that test. You would have a reason to give him another test. Do you know how to administer that test? Do you know how to administer the MMPI?
Do I know how to?
Yes.
Yes.
Have you done it before?
Oh, many times.
How many times do you think?
Hundreds.
Yet there was none in this, was there? There was no MMPI.
In what?
You only tested him to see if he was a psychopath.
Yeah, I did not administer the MMPI in this case.
And that's because based on this case, you went in with the preconceived notion that he was probably psychopathic.
Not at all.
With a crime like that? That wasn't even on the radar?
No, I mean, I went
And
into
I'm not
this,
even a doctor. I mean,
I went into this case not knowing the crime, but once I reviewed everything, obviously I knew the crime. But no, I didn't go into the case thinking it was a psychopath.
now I was with you at the jail when you were doing that,
Yes,
as
sir.
well as Mrs. Hawthorne. You stayed there for what, approximately 2.5 hours,
Right.
asking him questions, correct?
Right.
And that's what you based this on, as well as the data that you looked at.
Correct.
Would it be fair to say that he's had a, whether the cause is his own or whatever, a tumultuous life as a young adult, constantly in trouble,
Yeah, I mean, it has not been a good adjustment.
defying authority and things like that?
Defying authority wherever he is, yes.
And come on, this act, this manner in which this crime was committed was horrific beyond belief.
I'll agree with that.
You're just saying it's based on well, he didn't adjust too well in life. It's more than that, isn't it?
Well, I didn't say that, first of all. What I said was it's based on his personality, his character. There's people in prison all over the United States and all over the world for committing murders, some of them more heinous than others. You know, my position on this case is that there's not evidence of psychosis to justify the crime that was committed. To the contrary, there's a ton of evidence suggesting that this kid had major personality characterological issues beginning at an early age and that have continued even while he's been at the Marion County Jail.
So are you saying there's no evidence of psychosis as a result of this crime?
Well,
None.
Well, I mean, I know that Dr. Berlin said there's psychosis. I know at the, I mentioned that at Oakwood, I believe in March of 2009, the physician there diagnosed him with bipolar disorder, rapid cycling, and gave him Rebuttal.
What does that tell you? What does that suggest?
Well, what it suggests is, well, I mean, the notes suggested that at the time he was on Concerta, and the physician that was evaluating him, it sounded like the physician was saying that maybe this Concerta is making things worse for him. Maybe he has a bipolar disorder and we should try the Rebuttal, and that's what he did.
What happened to Mr. Bargo's grandfather?
Committed suicide.
What was his history?
My understanding is his history was that he had some mental health treatment.
What about Mr. Bargo's immediate father?
My understanding of his immediate father is that he had some addictions problems, not per se significant mental health treatment, but addictions problems, some alcoholism, some addiction to pain medications.
Now, one of your major contentions is in administering the MMPI that, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so correct me if I'm wrong, but that he should have let Mr. Bargo read it and respond to it, correct?
Yes, I mean, that's standardization. That's all I'm saying is there's standard ways to do it. We can't come in and say, I don't agree with this standardization. You know, people don't have the experience I have in administering the MMPI, and I don't use a diagnostic manual. I do it my way. You have to follow standardization whether you like it or not. It's the way, it's what you have to do as a professional because you have to compare that individual to the developmental sample.
Yeah, but yet you attack the efficacy of that test, but you don't put anything in its place other than something trying to show limitedly whether he's psychotic or not.
Well, not psychotic, psychopathic.
Psychopathic, excuse me.
No, sir, and you know, I mean, It's a reasonable point, and my answer would be I have tons of data on him. I don't have to have an MMPI to tell me what's going on with this kid.
I mean, forgive me if I don't understand that, because you don't produce any empirical evidence like a PET scan. There's none of that, okay? You don't produce any standardized test other than this test to determine whether he's psychotic. Yet, I don't need to know that to know what's going on. I mean, is it kind of like Qi or Feng Shui, you just get a feeling or something?
No, sir, not at all. It's the records. That tells the tale. When I'm looking at records and what the records tell me regarding the child or the adult, what they say and what they don't say, that's going to tell most of the tale in most of my forensic cases. If there's a case where I don't have much background data, I'll administer other tests in the immediate realm. But when there's lots of great data, like in Mr. Bargo's case, I really don't need an MMPI to tell me what's going on with Mr. Bargo.
You're looking at the psychological basis, psychological disturbances, right?
Correct.
As opposed to neurological. Like, for example, what you would look at in the PET scan. You're not an expert in the neurological.
No, you're right. I'm just, not to be a pest, but when we say neurological, like anytime you have a chemical imbalance, it's described as neurological. But if you're talking about like the PET scans, I do not do PET scans.
You don't interpret PET scans.
That's correct.
So you would have no way of testifying as an expert, as Dr. Wu did. Okay? Dr. Wu is a licensed doctor, medical doctor. You're not.
Correct.
Right?
Objection, Your Honor. He can't ask this witness to comment on the credibility or qualifications of another witness that he didn't even hear testify.
I don't believe he has done so at this stage. The objection is overruled.
You're not board certified in your field, are you?
No, I'm not.
You're not a medical doctor, are you?
No, I'm not.
You haven't published, have you?
No, I haven't published.
And you haven't written textbooks, have you?
No, sir.
You haven't lectured in a university, have you?
No.
So what you're saying is it's behavioral decisions.
That's a great way to characterize it, yes.
Well, you characterized it that way.
Well, I didn't characterize it with just those two words, but if I had to parse it down, behavioral decisions is a good way to describe it.
And you testified that it wasn't neurochemical in your opinion.
Right, and that's the difference between when we have somebody who's schizophrenic or schizoaffective, they are crazy. They are really crazy. When we talk about working in Chattahoochee, those are the guys in Chattahoochee that we see. And it's neurochemical. They can't control it. So what we have to do is we have to give them medication that's going to get their neurochemistry back in line to get them stable. So that's what I'm saying, is in Mr. Bargo's case, it's not neurochemical in that sense. It's behavioral, and that's the distinction, either neurochemical or behavioral, and it's behavioral with him.
But as I said, you're not conversant in PET scan and how that science interacts with behavioral psychology, are you?
I am not versed in PET scan, no.
Who told you that that he wrote on the driveway of the school that Tracy was a whore? Where did you get that information?
Nobody told me that. It was from, I think, a letter from the, I may be mistaken about this, but it's from the Lutheran school, and it seems like it was from one of the, I guess, fathers at the Lutheran school.
That book that you brought there with you, that's more or less it's behavioral disorders, right?
It's behavioral disorders and it's neurochemical disorders. It's behavioral disorders, meaning like the oppositional defiant that usually start in childhood versus the ones that are like schizophrenia that are neurochemical.
And how do they decide what, like if there's a disorder, you like to eat a lot of hot dogs or something like that? I believe that's in there or something, somewhere. I remember finding it one day. Who puts that stuff in? Seriously, it says there's a behavioral disorder on that, right?
Oh, I know, you're right. And yeah, what they do, they do committees where committees will get together on each disorder with professionals who have experience with those disorders, and they will discuss and ultimately come up with the criteria for that disorder.
So we campaign for our favorite psychological disorder to go in that book, I guess, right? Honestly.
Yeah, I mean, some do, but usually they try to identify individuals in the profession who have experience in that area, and they call them in to kind of consult.
And if I may have a moment to defer to my colleagues.
Yes, sir.
Did he bring up anything about hallucinations in the interview that you had with him?
I asked him specifically about hallucinations, and he said that he didn't want to talk about those.
What about his intelligence range?
Intelligence range, my guess would be average.
What grade level?
Well, when you're talking about average intelligence, you're usually talking about high school level.
Did you review any medical records that indicated that he had been given Seroquel before this incident, before being locked up in the jail?
I have a recollection of it. I couldn't point it out, but I think that at one time he was given Seroquel, maybe one other time before he came to the jail.
Does Oakwood refresh your recollection? Was it Oakwood?
Maybe Oakwood. I know Oakwood gave him Rebuttal, and there was an Abilify, and there was a Trazodone. I'm not sure about the Seroquel.
Okay. Now, usually Seroquel is usually 50 milligrams or less for sleep, isn't it?
I'm not sure about the dosage of Seroquel, the specific dosage range. What I do at the jail is I refer individuals, if they have sleep problems, to the medical doctor, because I can't prescribe. I'm not a medical doctor.
Because you're not a pharmacologist or anything like that, don't have any history in pharmacology other than what you've bumped into as far as your practice goes, right?
Right. Well, I mean, I have a lot of experience with the psychotropics, but I'm not a medical doctor, so I can't prescribe. So, yeah, I'm not sure of the ranges of each medication.
So you're not in a position to make comment on 400 milligrams or more of Seroquel being given not for the purposes of just sleep, are you?
No. What I would say is that Seroquel is, in my experience, especially over the last probably 5-7 years, it's given more for sleep than anything else, than psychosis. Some people are still on it for psychosis, but mostly it's given for sleep. And in fact, 90-95% of the folks that are getting the medication for sleep issues at the jail are on Seroquel because of the sleep issues.
You said 95%?
90-95% of the individuals taking Seroquel are not psychotic. They have sleep issues.
Where was that quantified? What journal or publication or internal document? Where do you find that total 95%?
It's just my experience. It's not quantified in the journal. It's my experience consulting with the jail.
So there's been what jail?
Gadsden County Jail.
Any other jails?
No, I've been consulting with the Gadsden County Jail about 6 years.
You look at DOC or something like that?
I go to DOC a lot, and it's my experience at DOC too, as a matter of fact, is it's often given for sleep there.
95%?
Well, I don't know about that in the DOC. I do know at Gadsden County Jail, yes.
How do you know it's just not the Gadsden County Jail's practice to just numb everybody down and put them to sleep? You don't.
Well, I know that, you know, I've been practicing for 17 years or so. Most of the individuals, I do 99% of what I do is forensic work. I run into people that take medications, you know, pretty much every day. And Seroquel is in my experience, you know, it's a second-generation antipsychotic. There's better ones than Seroquel. It's very sedating. That's why it's not given to many people for psychosis anymore.
Yeah, but what
makes
is the
them too
cost
tired.
comparatively?
It costs a lot. It's like $25 a pill, so it's very expensive. It's cost prohibitive in a lot of cases. The newer antipsychotics are cheaper, as a matter of fact.
So we could be knocking people out in prison with a lot cheaper drug, you're saying, right? After all, 95% are doing Seroquel, of the people that are doing Seroquel are doing it for sleep. Then the state's not getting much bang for their buck. They could use something cheaper, couldn't they?
Yeah, I mean, some things are tried, Benadryl, some over-the-counter stuff, and it's just not as effective. It's really sedating. Seroquel really knocks people on their, or helps them sleep a lot.
But in this individual case, you're just surmising or guessing. You don't know that it was to put him to sleep or for what it was for, do you?
Well,
What dosage was it, for example? In the jail, what were they giving it?
400 milligrams.
And you can't testify as to the significance of that, can you? As opposed to 50 milligrams.
No, I really can't.
Continue the witness.
Ms. Hawthorne wanted to confer with you.
Dilantin, what's that?
Dilantin is an anticonvulsant. It's under the umbrella of anticonvulsant. It's a seizure medication typically.
They were giving him that at times, weren't they?
I saw him one time he was given that, yes.
So the answer is yes, right?
2012, yes.
What would that have been for?
I have no idea. I didn't see any documentation as to why they gave him the Dilantin. I don't know why they gave it to him.
Did you inquire about that?
No.
What about Wellbutrin?
Wellbutrin is an antidepressant, but it has anxiolytic properties too. So it's a lot of times it's given for example, for people who are trying to quit smoking. It's good at addressing the cravings where the person doesn't ruminate about smoking a cigarette, and has some anti-anxiety properties and antidepressant properties.
What about Vistaril?
Vistaril is usually given for sleep.
Well, Vistaril wasn't one of the ones he was taking. It's a lot cheaper too, isn't it?
Vistaril and Benadryl are a lot cheaper, yes.
Regardless of whether you call him psychotic or whatever, you indicated that he had a sickness. You used the word sickness. Is that your expert opinion? Regardless of what you characterize it as.
Yeah, I mean, I think he has a personality sickness, just like any psychopath or just like any antisocial. It's a personality flaw. It's a characterological flaw that makes him different than most of us in a bad way.
And you can't testify because you don't know, because not being a medical doctor or like Dr. Wu, you can't testify that these manifestations of these personality disorders or defects, if you want to call it that, do have a neurological basis, such as organic brain damage or something that would be revealed on a PET scan, can you? So you can't discount that opinion, can you? Because you're not qualified to.
Well, I mean, what I would take issue with it, and I would
taking issue is one thing.
Right. So I can't interpret a PET scan, no, but I would take issue with it. I would take issue with all of the head injuries that have been reported, and
you've been here, right? Have you been in the audience?
Today, yes.
Okay. Well, it can come from things other than head injuries, but you wouldn't know about that, would you?
Yeah, I do know that.
Like hereditary disposition?
Yeah, or substance abuse.
Substance abuse, yeah. which we certainly had in this case, right?
We did.
So you can't discount the idea of organic brain damage possibly affecting his conduct and manifesting some of these behaviors.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I can't discount it because I can't read the PET scan. I don't know if it's relevant or not. I know that it's offered in a lot of cases, and I think in Mr. Bargo's case we have great data to say it's something different than that.
How can you say that? Because Dr. Wu says the data is consistent with that. It's just a difference of opinion, right?
Sustained. He did not hear Dr. Wu's testimony.
It's just a difference of opinion, I imagine, right?
That's fair, yes.
No further questions.
Redirect.
I just have one question, Your Honor. Dr. Pritchard, why is it that you haven't published or written any textbooks?
Well, it's not my interest. I'm too busy working.
Recross.
A lot of people usually publish.
Because it's their interest.
Or do research work.
Because it's their interest.
Who's the smart one?
Counsel, I noted a problem in the jury instructions. Let me see if that has been remedied. On the counting the cover page, 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth page, the first full paragraph, I think, has to be redacted. It's the paragraph regarding the defendant not testifying. That needs to come out, please. And we'll address the jury instructions further once the jury retires for the day. Noting everyone's presence back in the courtroom, please have the jury return. Oh, 1 second, 1 second. You have further testimony to present?
Yes, we're going to recall Dr. Brown just briefly, Judge,
For what purpose?
for the purpose to refute their allegation that there was no report of hallucinations.
For that brief purpose only.
That is the only purpose. I discussed that with Dr. Brown, who's present, and he understands that is the only purpose.
Very well. Please have the jury return. Members of the jury, at this time we do have a witness who's going to testify briefly in rebuttal. Mr. Holloman, you may call your next witness.
Finished with recall of Dr. Robert Brown.
Please raise your right hand, face the clerk.
You swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do. Please be seated.
Please, court. Dr. Berlin, of course, you're still under oath. You realize that, right? You reviewed records as well as spoke with Mike Bargo, Jr. about auditory hallucinations, did you not?
Yes.
And did you find that there were complaints that he had those?
Well, as I said, I witnessed in the interview with Dr. Pritchard that he made reference to, at several points, having frightening auditory hallucinations that Dr. Pritchard didn't follow up on.
Now, in all candor, I did see one point where he said he didn't want to talk about them, correct?
Correct.
But some of these are documented in some of the jail records, is that correct?
Well, just because I have found that when you ask the global question, do you hear voices, almost to a person, mentally ill people say no. But if you ask very specific, non-threatening questions like, when you're awake at night and it's quiet, do you think someone calls your name and nobody has? Then they'll say, how did you know, frequently.
Tender the witness, Sean.
Cross-examination.
No questions.
May this witness be excused? Mr. Holmes. Ms. Arnold?
Yes,
You're excused, sir.
Judge, that concludes our witnesses.
Ladies and gentlemen, that completes the testimony that you will consider in this phase of the trial. What we're going to do is take a recess for the day. What remains are the closing arguments by the attorneys and the instructions on the law that I will give you, and then you will then retire to consider your advisory sentence. I don't want to give you this case too late in the day. I want you fresh when you're deliberating. So for that reason, we're going to recess for the day. We'll follow the same procedure that we have during the course of the trial. I'll ask you to report promptly at 10 minutes before 9 tomorrow morning. I'll see you at that time. If you'll take those notepads and give those to the bailiff, please, in those envelopes.
Judge, we did have a matter to take up of the certified convictions.
We do, and we also have, I believe, some additional requested jury instructions.
Yes, sir. I have not gotten this copy because you have this that I wanted to get before, and it has to do with budget issues, and that's a bookkeeping matter that we can probably address tomorrow morning.
The motion to amend defense budget, parentheses, second close parentheses, I'll grant that motion.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Will you get me an order to that effect?
I was in the process of printing out the other proposed defense instructions based on the court's earlier ruling. If I can give these to the court tomorrow morning so that I can give copies to everybody.
No, ma'am, we're going to address jury instructions now. Each side is entitled to know what instructions on the law that I will give before you give a closing argument.
Well, no, I understand that, Your Honor. I know, but you're not going to include these in the instructions, is what I'm trying to get at.
I don't know if I will or won't. I'll address those now.
Okay. I will need a few more minutes then because
Do you have a set?
I have one set that I haven't signed. They're
If you'll
printed out.
sign those, and we'll get copies made. Take those off, start getting them confused. This is the most recent set, right? Just shred those.
This is number 20 through number 33, and I have over 50, Your Honor, that I still have to print.
Sure. 1 second. Are these all non-standard instructions regarding mitigation?
Yes.
However many you have, print them all out.
Yes, sir.
sign them, please. We'll get copies distributed, and when that has been accomplished, I'll return to the courtroom. Just call me. We'll be in recess until that time.
All rise, please.